psychology today. Okay, so first of all, cognitive psychology. So this is the study of the mental process. So anything such as processing information, that is going to all be under cognitive psychology. So cognitive psychology is going to be split into three parts: memory, thinking, and language. So first of all, memory. So memory is learning that has remained over time and information that is stored and can be retrieved. And memory can be broken down into three steps, and that is called the info processing model. So first of all, we have encoding, which is getting information into your brain. And after getting that information to your brain, you start to retain it, which is storage. And then anytime you need to use the information, that is called retrieval. So this is really similar to a computer, how a computer processes information and how it encodes, stores, and retrieves it. And a lot of times people think our memory is actually really bad, but in reality, it is better than we think. So in a study, people were shown 2,500 slides for 10 seconds, and later 28 of the slides that were shown were repeated along with never seen before slides. And people were able to pick out the slides they have seen 90% of the time. So our memory is actually pretty good. So there are two types of processing. There is automatic processing, which takes place without any conscious effort. And then we have parallel processing, or actually automatic processing and effortful processing. So automatic processing, within that we have parallel processing. So parallel processing is the ability to process multiple things at once. So automatic processing can simultaneously deal with space, time, frequency, and well-learned information. So if you take a look at the picture on your right, you can see a picture of the bird. So, but at the same time, you are able to process both the color, the branch, the leaves, the dimensions. You can see how it is focused specifically on the bird and the branch, and everything else is blurry. So you can process all of that at the same exact time. And then we have effortful processing. So effortful processing takes place when we put in purposeful effort into remembering something. And the amount of information remembered depends on the amount of time spent learning the information. So this, for effortful processing, you have to actually pay attention. And then within effortful processing, you have rehearsal. So this is repeating the information to get it processed. So this is things like studying. You have to repeatedly study the information. And then we also have overlearning. So overlearning is the additional rehearsal to increase the retention, so increase our memory. And then we have spacing effect. So spacing effect is information spread out over time is better remembered. So when you study, it is better to study over a span of a couple weeks than it is to just study all at once. And then we have serial positioning effect. This is the tendency to remember the first and the last things of a list. So if you are given a series of, if you're shown a series of pictures and you are told to memorize the sequence, you are more likely to remember the first couple of images and the last couple of images. And then more on to encoding, there are actually three types of verbal encoding. And when I say verbal encoding, I mean anything in relation to words or terms. So first we have visual encoding. So this is encoding images and visual sensory information. So if you had to remember the word tree, you can use visual encoding and imagine a picture of a tree. That is going to help you encode easier. And then we have acoustic encoding. So this is the use of auditory stimuli or hearing to implant these memories. So if someone were talking and they use alliteration, that's going to help you remember those specific phrases easier because it pops out. And then we have semantic encoding. So this is the use of sensory input that have a specific meaning. So definitions. If you try to remember a specific term, it might be easier to remember it by the definitions of the words. So generally speaking, semantic encoding works best out of the three. Okay, and now we have mnemonic devices. So this helps organize our encoding. And mnemonic devices are techniques that help us remember something. So we have chunking, which is a mnemonic device. This organizes information into groups. So you can see there's a series of numbers, which in the beginning is really hard to kind of memorize or do anything with. However, if you separate them into groups, it is way easier to look at and it's easier to remember. So this is why our phone numbers are in series of 3, 3, and 4. And then we have hierarchies. So these organize information into a structure. So for example, we have flow charts. And another example is the 3 branches of the US government. So under the government, there are 3, and there's often a picture or a infographic showing the 3 branches of the government. So that is easier to organize that information. Any questions? All right. So let's talk about storage. So according to the Atkinson-Shiffrin memory model, there are 3 parts to storage. First, we have sensory, short-term memory, and then we have long-term memory. So first of all, sensory memory. So this is a brief memory that allows people to retain impressions of sensory information. And this is generally related to our sight or hearing, so anything we see. These are the very, very brief moment we receive them, and that is that. So then we have 2 types of sensory memory. We have iconic memory. So for a brief moment, the image remains burnt in our eyes. So if you're looking at the slide and then you suddenly close your eyes, you can still technically kind of see the image for a second before it disappears. And then we have echoic memory. This is where sound is briefly stored. And then sensory memory is either forgotten or immediately transferred to short-term memory. So short-term memory, or we can also call it working memory. So this is a temporary holding place for information that we are using at the current time. So short-term memory is actually very, very short. So this actually lasts about 15 to 30 seconds, although some articles say it lasts to a minute, but that is the longest I have seen. And then it has a limited capacity. So short-term memory only holds about 7, give or take 2 slots of information. And that is kind of debatable because you can't really put a definition to slots of memory. But what they've discovered is that you can hold about 7 or about 5 to 9 pieces of information at once. And then the memory is either forgotten or transferred to long-term memory. So long-term memory is storage information over an extended period of time. So long-term memory actually is unlimited, has unlimited capacity. And rehearsal with intent helps imprint those things into long-term memory. So when you study, when you repeat something over and over again, that's going to help imprint and move that information over to long-term memory from short-term memory. And then the memory is stored throughout the brain. So if you remember from our biology unit, the two examples would be the hippocampus, which stores long-term memory, and then we also have the amygdala, which stores memory specifically related to emotions. And then we have long-term potentiation. So this is strengthening of the neural pathways, allowing for faster firing. So this helps you remember faster and easier. The threshold needed to achieve action potential is lowered. So this study is actually done on sea slugs. They noticed that after repeated exposure, it took less stimuli for the neurons to fire, and that applies to humans as well. And then we have flashbulb memory, so clear memories of emotional events. So this would this would have something to do with the amygdala because it is in charge of emotional memories. And then short-term stress can increase retention. And then we have implicit and explicit memory. So implicit memory are retention that is unconscious and conditioned association. So that means that we are not really paying attention to these memories. These are kind of just engraved in our brains. We don't have to pay attention or really focus on studying it. And then within that, we have procedural memory. So these are memories for performance of actions or skills. For example, riding a bike. You don't really need to pay attention to once you learn how to ride a bike, it's kind of in your brain. You don't need to practice multiple times in order to get it, and you don't need to use that information all the time in order for it to stay there. And then we have explicit memory or declarative memory. So this is consciously recalled memory. So facts or experiences, so these are facts and experiences that you can call up. So these you actually have to pay attention to, and you have to make sure that if you want to remember something, you have to actually work on it. And the hippocampus is involved in forming these explicit memories. Okay, so let's talk about retrieval. So there are the 3 R's to retrieval. We have recall, so this is the ability to call up the stored information. So for example, if you were to do a fill in the blank test, you're able to call up the information in order to fill in the blank. And then we have recognition. So this is identifying something already learned. So it is in your memory, and you should be able to recognize the different questions. So it would be in a multiple choice test, whichever one fits best, you can recognize that one. So that is recognition. And then we have relearning. So this is the measure of time saved when learning something a second time. And learning a second time does come easier and faster. So we also have retrieval cues. So this is the stimulus that can help pull information out of our memory. The best types of retrieval cues are associations made as you are encoding. So if you're doing something as you're studying, that is going to help become a retrieval cue. So we have priming. So this is the activation of memory associations, and this is unconscious. And then we have the context effect. So putting yourself back in the setting of where you experience something can help increase that the chance of retrieval. So for example, if you know someone by name, but you might not recognize them in a different setting because you're only used to them in a certain context. For example, if you made a friend with someone at school, but then you end up seeing them elsewhere, you might not end up recognizing them because it's in the wrong context. And then deja vu happens often because you are in a similar context with common cues. So a lot of times different stimuli, those are very, very similar, and it brings up that memory, which makes you believe that you have done this before. And there's actually I have a tip. So if you chew on a specific type of gum, or if you put on a specific scent while you are studying, and then you expose yourself to the same stimuli during a test, it can help you remember better because of retrieval cues. If you're chewing orange flavored gum, and then you chew it again when you're taking your test, it's going to bring up those memories easier. All right, so more onto retrieval cues. We have state-dependent memory. So we are more likely to remember something when we are in the same emotional state we are when we learned it. So an example would be alcohol. If you're drunk, you are more likely to remember something that you did when you were drunk before. And then we have mood congruent memory. So this is the tendency to recall experiences that are consistent with the current mood. So if you are sad, you are more likely to remember memories of when you were sad beforehand. So that actually might make you more sad. And then we have the Pollyanna principle. So this is the principle that pleasant events are processed more efficiently and more accurately compared to when you are in an unpleasant experience. And then we have forgetting. So there are different types of forgetting. for the first one we have is encoding failure. So this happens when in the very first stages of encoding, we were never actually paying attention in the first place. So it doesn't actually get past our sensory memory. We're not actually paying attention to it. Therefore, it doesn't actually go to short-term memory and then go to long-term memory. And then we have storage decay. So this use of certain memories, which aren't always accessed, will end up disappearing because it's just going to take up room and it's just unnecessary. So our brains just kind of dump it out. And then we have the forgetting curve. So Hermann Ebbinghaus developed this forgetting curve, which basically says that at first we forget something very, very fast, and then forgetting diminishes and then levels off. But through repeated studying, as you can see in the example, you can see on the graph, so you can see how quickly you forget on the first day, but if you actually review and you study, that's going to help level off and make forgetting slower. And then we have the inference. So this is, actually we have retrieval failure. So this is the inability to locate the memory. It is in storage, but it can't be retrieved. So this is tip of the tongue effect. So if you remember something, you want to say something, but you just can't seem to remember, that is because you are experiencing retrieval failure. So you can see that there's there can be different ways of forgetting throughout the process of remembering or making memories. And then we have inference. Inference. So this is the interaction of two or more memories, which can interfere with retrieval. So if you are making an effort to remember where you put your keys, but then you make an effort to remember where you put your phone, it may end up interfering with your memory over where you put your keys. So that is interference. Okay, so let's talk about thinking. So first of all, we have concepts. So concepts are mental groupings of similar objects, ideas, events, or people. This allows for identification of new objects. And within that, we have hierarchy. So hierarchies organize these concepts from broad to narrow. This is going to help us kind of process things easier and helps us remember things easier. As you remember hierarchy with memory. So for example, the animal eagles. So you would go from animal to land animal, flying land animal, and then predatory flying land animal, and then you would identify them as eagles. And then you have prototypes. So this is the ideal image or the ideal example that sums up the concept. So if you close your eyes and you imagine a bike, whatever bike you think of can be different from other people, but that is your prototype of what all bikes would look like. Okay, and then we have problem solving. So problem solving is a strategy for when a goal must be reached by thinking in a certain way. There's different types of problem solving. We have trial and error, and this is trying different methods to achieve a goal until you find one that works. So this is just trying a lot of different random things to see if you can solve the problem that you have. And there's a lot of problems with this one because it is very slow and time consuming. You're kind of just trying different random things. So it might not even end up working in the first place. And then we have algorithm. So this is the step-by-step procedure that guarantees a solution, but it is also very, very slow and time consuming. But an example of algorithm is math problems. So there's certain steps to solve certain math problems. So that would be algorithm. And then we have heuristics, which we will talk about in the next slide. And then we have insight. So this is a sudden emergence of a solution. So, eureka or aha, which sometimes you just suddenly find a solution. That is insight. Okay, and then we have heuristics. So heuristics are shortcuts such as educated guesses. It is an efficient and speedy rule that can apply to the situation. A lot of times, kind of just think common sense or just using your brain. That is heuristics. And then there's different types of heuristics. We have representative heuristics. So this is judging the likelihood of things in terms of how well they match the prototype. And this is kind of similar to stereotyping. And then we have the availability heuristic. This is estimating the likelihood of an event based on what is available. For example, we tend to believe shark attacks are more frequent than they actually are because um, they are more frequent in our memory because of, for example, the news. Whenever there's a shark attack, they are more, because of how rare it is, they are often emphasized on the news, which makes us think it's actually not as rare. Or also, a lot of times in movies, sharks often end up being a perpetrator, like a bad guy, something. So things like that is gonna make us think shark attacks are more likely to happen. And then as much as heuristic seems to be the easiest one, there are problems to it. You are prone to error because you are almost jumping to conclusions. And then obviously with stereotyping, that is always not the best. Okay, and then there are obstacles to problem solving. So some things do block us from actually solving the problem. First thing we have is the confirmation bias. So this is the tendency to search for information that goes along with what we believe. So if you remember in Unit 2 when we talked about the scientific foundations, how a lot of times we often have confirmation bias. We just kind of end up ignoring anything that doesn't go with our thinking. So that is something that is going to be a big problem to problem solving. And then we have fixation. So this is the inability to see a problem from a new perspective. For example, if you see a door that says pull, but you don't see it and you're just pushing the door and you're not actually trying to see if there's any other way to open a door, you're just pushing the door. So you are fixated on that problem in one specific way. And then we have functional fixedness. This is the tendency to view problems only in their customary manner. So for example, if you are in a location that has high crime and you're walking by yourself and you have keys, if you have functional fixedness, you might just see keys as just a regular set of keys. However, if you go over and you might be able to see that keys can be more than just anything to unlock a door. You can use it as a weapon if you put it between your knuckles, things like that. That will bypass functional fixedness. And then we have mental sets. So this is a tendency to use solutions that worked in the past rather than looking for alternate ideas. So a lot of times it can end up being not as effective as if you actually just kind of thought of a new solution. If you're just kind of stuck on that one solution, it's going to end up being inefficient. And then language. So this is how we combine spoken or written or signed words as we think and communicate. So let's talk about language structure. So first of all, we have phoning. We're going to go, also by the way, we're going to go from smallest form of language to the largest. So first of all, we have phonemes. This is the smallest sound unit in a language. So anything that makes a sound is going to be a phoneme. The English language has 26 letters, but we have 40 phonemes. So we have 40 sounds. And you can see that on the side of the table. You can see that all the different types of phonemes. And then we have morphemes. So this is the smallest unit in a language that has meaning. So starstruck would have two morphemes because star is one word and then struck is another. So those have two different meanings, but put together they have one specific meaning. So a couple of examples. You have the word table that has 4 phonemes. So if you say ta, a, bull, that is 4 phonemes. And then that is one phoneme, or sorry, 1 morphemes because it has one meaning. But if you look at trucks, that has 4 phonemes and 2 morphemes because truck is one meaning, but if you add an S to it, the S has a meaning. It makes truck more than one. So that's 2 morphemes. And then we have grammar. So grammar is the system of rules for a language. And then we have semantics. This gives us the meaning from morphemes, words, and sentences. So this is just definitions. And then we have syntax. So this is the rule we use to assemble sentences. Any questions? All right, so language development. This is the comprehension of language. So comprehension of language comes before speaking. We understand words better than we actually speak. So there are 4 stages of language development. So this goes from the very early ages of infancy to over the ages of 2. So first we have the babbling stage. This is from infancy. So first you start with a lot of cooing sounds, and then you start to make vowel sounds such as oo or ah at the ages of 2 months. And then by the ages of 4 months, you start to add consonants to the vowels. Um, and then before 10 months, babies are receptive to all language, but becomes functionally deaf to other languages after. So before the ages of 10, that is when you should be exposing your child to multiple languages but then afterwards, babies are going to ignore the languages that they weren't exposed to. And then we have the 1-word stage. So this begins at the ages of 1 year or 2 months. And then by 18 months, acquisition goes from 1 word a week to 1 word a day. They start to realize what words are, they are language. And so they start to pick it up faster and faster as their brain develops. And that is called, and then they also use holographic speech. This means that they use a single word to convey complete thoughts. So if a baby says milk, then they're using holographic speech. They're hungry, right? They want food, they want milk. So they are able to convey what they're feeling, what they want with just 1 word. And then we have the 2-word stage. This begins at the ages of 2 years. And then they use telegraphic speech. So a child uses 2 words, consists of basic nouns and verbs. So you can see that on the picture, baby read, mama see, things like that. Those are 2 words, and they are able to convey their thoughts and ideas, whatever they want, they use 2 words. And after the ages of 2, language then begins to develop rapidly as our brain develops and you're able to complete full sentences. And also, young learners tend to overgeneralize. They apply grammatical rules to unnecessary situations. Okay, and then last but not least, we have language in thinking. So we have first thing we have is linguistic determination. So language and its structures limit and determine human knowledge or thought. So whatever we think is in our specific language, and that's going to affect how we think, our limitations. And then we have linguistic relativity. So individuals experience the world based on the structures of the language they habitually use. So for an example, the Inuit people have about 50 words to describe snow. They see snow as more than how English speakers would see it. For us, we just have the word snow, but for Inuit people, they have tons of different ways to describe snow because they are so exposed to snow. They use it in their everyday life. So then they would have 50 different words to describe snow. Okay, and then that is everything for today. Next week, we will be talking about developmental psychology. So this is going to be we're going to learn about how babies think from infancy to adulthood. And then we have one assignment that is going to be a true or false memory worksheet, and you will see more of it when you open up the assignments. But that is everything for today. So you guys are free to go.